What's going on, guys? Today we are going to learn about why supergiant is so controversial in leopard geckos. Okay, first let's look at a definition from two great resources for finding out about leopard gecko genetics. So resource number one is a website that I have promoted before in this video here where I show you how to use it, called Leopard Gecko Wiki. When I was first starting out my research in leopard geckos, Leopard Gecko Wiki helps you understand 85 to 90% of all the morphs that were out there, and that was like 10 years ago. So now it might be a little bit less, to 70 to 80% of the morphs that are out there, because nobody is keeping Leopard Gecko Wiki up to date. But it's a great resource for finding out information on leopard gecko morphs. So if you want to learn how to use Leopard Gecko Wiki, check out this video here in the top right corner. But looking at the definition for supergiant, supergiant is the homozygous version of the giant trait. Currently, the biggest supergiant moose from Ron Tremper weighed in at 156 grams and 11 3/8 inches. Now here's why I've never been a super big fan of supergiant, is because 11 3/8 inches is only about 2 inches more than a traditional leopard gecko. A traditional leopard gecko is already 9 to 10 inches as a male, and so 11 3/8 inches is only 1 to 2 inches more in length, but it's mainly the width and the girth of the animal. Like, if you look at this animal, you could see how chunky and overweight this animal is. And so sure, if you power feed a leopard gecko, you could get the weight up there. But I have seen some impressively long leopard geckos, but in supergiants, I would say length is more important than width. And that's one of the reasons why supergiant is so controversial, because a lot of people just try to power feed their gecko and be like, oh, as long as it's 110 grams, it classifies as a supergiant, and they just power feed their gecko and it's like 9 inches long, but then 110 grams. And I think that is defeating the point of what we want in a giant line. In a giant line of leopard gecko, we want a longer, bigger on average animal, not a wider and obese animal. That's just not the goal of what it means to be bigger. The giant and supergiant trait is a co-dominant morph. They got that wrong. It's actually an incomplete dominant morph, so this is not up to date. They used the wrong wording there. There are 3 forms: the normal, the giant, and the supergiant, and we'll talk about that in this episode. Normals do not carry the gene. Giants carry 1 copy of the gene, and supergiants carry 2 copies of the gene. I will show that off and demonstrate to you here in this video. And that's pretty much all that it covers. Now let's check out one of the most respected leopard gecko breeders in the world, John from Gecko Boa, and this is what his website says about the giant gene. It's characterized by large size that can be genetically passed on to offspring. There has been a long and heated debate on whether the gene is incomplete dominant, recessive, or line bred. My opinion, I personally feel it is best described as a recessive, but may in fact be line bred. Very hard to find and prove true supergiants. A lot of geckos that are labeled supergiant are just overfed normals and mixes. Serious test breeding and honest feeding regimes must be taken to ensure true supergiants. Unfortunately, overfeeding for weight has taken its toll on many of these geckos. All the recorded breakers seem to have died within a couple years. Best to not solely look at the scale and go for length instead. The scale, which he's talking about weight, can be used in a more accurate way if feeding is not overdone. For example, if you had a 14-inch leopard gecko and it was only 120 grams, that would be way better than a 9-inch leopard gecko that is 150 grams. The overall length is what we want to go for. And who even knows if giant and supergiant had some other bloodlines mixed in there that may have helped early on, like Angraminu and stuff like that, you know? I don't know a lot of people that would hold to that theory, but I'm just saying there really isn't a lot of proof or overwhelming evidence and lineage tracking where we can be like, yeah, this is absolutely what's going on in this line. It's still a very highly debated topic, and a lot of new people easily get confused about it. So hopefully we will be able to clear that up in this video. John mentions here that it's recognized to be one of 3 different types of genetic: incomplete genetic, line bred genetic or recessive genetic. Now, back in the day when supergiant was first discovered, let me see if this article says it here. It doesn't say the date, but it had to be like the early 2000s, I want to say. It's been around for a long time. So back when it was discovered in the early 2000s, it was proclaimed to be an incomplete dominant gene. Do you guys know any other incomplete dominant genes in the leopard gecko hobby? If you said Max Snow, that is correct. And this may help you understand how it was once thought to function as a gene, because one copy of the Max Snow gene gives you a less yellow, less orange gecko. 2 copies gives you no yellow, no orange, and it's called a super snow, and it's all white with black spots. So the regular form does something to change the look of the animal, and the super form sort of doubles that. If you want to look at it, it gives a further expression to make the animal look different. So giants were thought to be bigger than your average leopard gecko, and super giants even bigger than the giants. So we thought. But it's not that easy. As time went on, certain people realized that not every gecko that came from giant and super giant lineage was actually bigger than average, but some of them were actually average or pretty small geckos. And I have really good personal experience with this as far as receiving and breeding some of the highest end, most expensive, coming from like true lines and recorded lineage giants and super giants. And I don't seem to produce larger than average geckos with them. Like, yeah, every once in a while, maybe a bigger than average gecko will pop out, but it's nowhere near the consistency that it should be if the genetic is incomplete dominant, because incomplete dominance is a guarantee to produce an animal that is going to be different than a normal. So if a normal is a 70-gram adult male, then a giant is guaranteed to produce an 80, 90, 100-gram animal if it was an incomplete dominant. So incomplete dominant is a very guaranteed genetic trait. It's like Max Snow. Once you have a Max Snow, it is 100% guaranteed to change the look of the animal. And once you have a super Max Snow, it is 100% guaranteed to double the change of the animal. And so if giant and super giant was an incomplete dominant gene, we should see a ton of big geckos and a ton of double big geckos, and we just don't see that. So then people started to think it was line bred. So line bred means that there will be a natural variance of size of the animal. So let's use Black Knight, for example. If you breed a Black Knight to a Black Knight, some of those babies will not show a lot of black. On the other end of the spectrum, some of those babies will be very high black, very heavy black. And in the middle of the spectrum, you will get some animals that are half black and half not black. It's the same with what most people tend to think is happening with giant and super giant nowadays, is it's a spectrum. So yes, some giant and super giant lineage animals will be bigger than average. Most of them will just be average, and some of them will be smaller than average. The next thing that came about with giant and super giant was when Ron Tremper released his most recent book, which looks like it may have been October 3rd, 2017, if I'm getting that correct, which sounds about right, because that was, about the same time that I was starting to deep dive back into leopard geckos, and I heard about his book being released. But if that date is wrong, somebody can correct me in a comment below. But let's say that date is right. Most recently, Ron Tremper, you can see his first book, if this is correct, was released in 2012, or maybe he had another one in 2005. So Ron Tremper, if I'm looking at this correctly, he is very well known. I refer to him as the godfather of leopard geckos. Respect him so much, love him so much. He is really the man that inspired people to breed and get into leopard geckos on a social level. Like, he was out there, he was in the public, he was making books, he was making videos back in the day and all that kind of stuff, and it inspired a lot of people. So you definitely got to give him his flowers. But there was a little controversy when he released this most recent book in 2017, because I did not read the book, but I heard in that book through the grapevine that he was saying that supergiant was now classified as a recessive genetic. Anybody who knows recessive genetics Take albinism, for example, Tremper albino, Bell albino, Rainwater albino, any of those albinos, right, as a baseline marker understanding of how recessive genes work. You need 2 copies of the gene, one from dad and one from mom, to produce a visual looking animal. So with incomplete dominant genes, 1 copy changes the look of an animal, 2 copies changes the look of the animal even more. With line bred genes, these animals are receiving multiple copies of genetic traits from dad and mom, and some of those traits are causing animals to fall on one side of the spectrum, the other side of the spectrum, or somewhere in the middle. And then with recessive traits, it's also a guaranteed change, similar to incomplete dominant, except you need 2 copies to make the visual expression of that change. For example, if you breed an albino to a non-albino, none of the babies will be albino, but they will all secretly be carrying 1 copy of the albino gene. So if you were then to breed those babies back to each other, some of their offspring would hit on 2 copies of the gene that were passed, one from dad, one from mom, that were passed down, and now you would have an official recessive gecko. So what are these little people here beneath each one of these camps of genetics? This is my current thinking of where the hobby leans as far as the people that I talk to and the information that you see out there and just what you hear people say about giant and supergiant. So most people, you can see this group of large people here, most people nowadays think that giant and supergiant is line bred. I fall into that category. I think it's a line bred gene, a line bred trait. I think that some big animals popped out a long time ago and people started breeding those big animals and they wanted to create something out of it, make some buzz and some excitement for like a new genetic trait that people can get their hands on, and it became what it became. It was more of a marketing thing that really took off. And then years down the line, people started to realize, hey, this isn't really acting like an incomplete dominant gene. And so most people kind of abandoned ship and went into thinking that it was just line bred, because we were seeing a lot of variance from small animals to medium animals to larger animals. And so that is how a line bred genetic trait typically works. It's on a spectrum and you'll see a lot of variance between babies and offspring. Then you have the OGs, some of the people in this crowd that just don't want to give it up. They're like, it was an incomplete dominant gene from the start. I worked with it that way. I labeled all my animals that way, and I am not leaving this camp. This is the 3 amigos. You can see that this is a much less held belief, but it still is held by some people in the hobby because of information like this on Leopard Gecko Wiki, which is saying that it is an incomplete dominant trait, which I think they just made a mistake. This should say incomplete dominant, but it actually says co-dominant. There's actually no leopard geckos that we know of that are co-dominant, no ball pythons that we know of that are co-dominant. Co-dominance is something that is seen more like in the plant world and in the mammal world. You could even look on, oh gosh, why is that guy's name spacing me right now? He always opens up his videos with, well, hi guys. I love him though. I watched a lot of his videos too because I geeked out, and he's like a scientist, but he's also a reptile hobbyist enthusiast. You guys know who I'm talking about probably by now. Clint's Reptiles. So I used to watch a lot of Clint's Reptiles because he actually is like a scientist. Like he went to school for like biology or some of those things. So like he knows the intricacies of genetics and stuff like that much more than your average person. And he does have some great videos on his channel about dominance, co-dominance, incomplete dominance, recessive, and I think line bred, but maybe not line bred. But anyway, he would also say in those videos that he doesn't know of any reptiles that are co-dominant unless something has changed since he released those videos a while back. Co-dominance is just not something we see in reptiles, at least not very often, if it does exist. So these 3 amigos right here, they're holding on to tradition and they're like, no, we won't budge. Or they just genuinely think that the morph behaves in this way. But like I said, most people do not think that the supergiant and giant morph behaves in an incomplete dominant way. Most people think it behaves in a line bred way. Then you got Ron Tremper over here. I kind of meant to make this as a joke by putting him by himself, but he lost a lot of credibility when he came out with his book and he called it recessive. Now, I do find it interesting that John from Gecko Boa thinks that it's recessive. Maybe he's had some intricate conversations with Ron, and I don't know, maybe Ron has been able to share with him some reasons of why it convinced John to think that it's recessive. But I kind of meant this to be funny and a joke that not many people hold to this stance that giant or supergiant is a recessive trait. Now let's take a look at how incomplete dominance works. So I am going to make a video, more videos, on how genetics work in leopard geckos. But I do have a great series. It's an old series, but it's a great series. It was from when I was a smaller content creator and some of the videos never really took off. But I gotta tell you, if you are trying to learn about gecko and leopard gecko genetics, this series in the top right corner is fantastic. Line breeding, Mendelian breeding, recessive, dominant, incomplete dominant, all of that stuff. I go in detail about how all of that works. But I wanna redo all of that and chop it up and make it easier, because some of those videos were like 30-40 minutes long. I just want to make 10-20 minute videos on one topic at a time, and so I will be making those videos coming up. But to conclude this video on why giant and supergiant is so controversial, let's take a look at how incomplete dominance works. So incomplete dominance, which is what giant and supergiant was thought to be originally, would work in this way. Here we have a dad leopard gecko and we have a mom leopard gecko. Right next to dad and mom leopard gecko is something that is called chromosomes. Chromosomes are what you inherit from your parents. You may have heard of the phrase like 23andMe, and that is because humans have 23 chromosomes that make up our genetic code that give us skin color, hair color, eye color, height, strength, all of that, bone density, like all that stuff is included in DNA, which is expressed in chromosomes. And so a quick Google search will tell us leopard geckos have 38 chromosomes, which is actually 19 pairs. Now that is very important, because why is a pair of chromosomes important? One chromosome comes from dad, one chromosome comes from mom. So when you take a look at this male leopard gecko up here, he inherited one of these chromosomes from his dad and one of these chromosomes from his mom, and that's what we're going to show off in this genetic example of how incomplete dominant genes work. So let's say this dad has this chromosome here and this chromosome here. You can see this little highlighted area where one of the highlights is blue and the other highlight is pink. This is called a locus point on the chromosome of the gecko, and each of these chromosomes have multiple locus points. But this is just one locus point where the giant gene is located if it's an incomplete dominant gene. So the giant gene will be expressed by this blue color here, and the normal non-giant gene will be expressed by this pink color here. So dad is a giant, mom is a giant, because they both only have one copy of the giant gene according to incomplete dominance. Well, when dad and mom breed, their offspring are going to have a percentage chance that they will inherit one half of the chromosome or the other half of the chromosome. Because remember, chromosomes come in pairs, and dad can only pass on one half of this chromosome, and mom can only pass on one half of this chromosome to an offspring. And so you could say that there's like 10 babies or 20 babies, but we're gonna show just two different babies right here. Baby number one, dad split his chromosome in half, because when reproduction happens, the chromosome is split in half, and baby number one will only inherit one of these two chromosomes. So baby number one inherited a normal chromosome from dad. He did not inherit this giant chromosome. And so when you go to mom, mom's DNA will also be split, and she can only pass on one of these two chromosomes to each offspring. And so to this offspring up here, she passes along the actual blue giant gene to this baby. So now this baby has two chromosomes, because every animal has to have two chromosomes. You can't just have like a floating missing chromosome in your DNA, right? So this animal now inherited the giant chromosome, the chromosome that had the giant gene from mom on it. And now the two chromosomes that make up this gecko right here, gecko number 1, is the giant gene and a normal gene, because each locus point has a genetic trait that is inherited from mom and inherited from dad. So in this case, dad passed on a normal trait at that locus point, and mom passed on a giant trait at that locus point, making this offspring number 1 just a simple giant that only has one copy of the giant gene. Now, what is unique about this baby right here? Well, if you look at these colors, why are both of these locus points blue? That is because when dad's DNA split for this offspring inherited this genetic trait from dad, from this chromosome, and also inherited this chromosome from mom. And so both of those chromosomes came together, as you can see by these arrows right here, and both of those chromosomes were carrying the giant gene, making this animal a homozygous form of that trait. So if you do a quick Google search, homozygous, homo means the same, and zygotos means yoked or paired together. So it basically means the same pair. So this animal above is heterozygous. The pair is not the same. It has one copy of the giant gene and one copy of a normal gene at that locus point. So it's only a giant. This gecko right here is the homo form, meaning 2 pairs. So it's got one of each. Now, what is the only way that we are going to 100% know whether giant and supergiant is incomplete dominant, line bred, or recessive? We need genetic testing. Now, as far as I know, for leopard geckos, there are 2 possibilities in which this can happen through. So Geckos Etc., one of the OGs of leopard gecko hobby and breeding, he works very closely with this doctor named Dr. Longhua Guo. If that name sounds familiar, I made a video here in the top right corner talking about the lemon frost gene, showing the studies that he composed with his team at the University of California, UCLA, where they studied the lemon frost gene for 3 years and came to a conclusion on what was going on. And then he also did an interview with Evan from Strength and Leos afterwards, talking about what they weren't able to figure out from those studies and how the lemon frost gene could be cured if someone was to take that responsibility to push for a cure or further understanding of that genetic trait. He was the guy responsible for that study, leading that study. So Geckos Etc. works very closely with this guy, and he came over one time in 2021. Well, not one time, but I mean, in this post in 2021, Steve from Geckos Etc. made a post talking about how him and Dr. G right here were actually working on decoding the leopard gecko genome and figuring out different genetic traits and where they sit in the gecko's DNA and on which chromosomes, because different chromosomes are responsible for different genetic traits. For example, the albino trait might be on, let's just say, chromosome number 1, and the giant gene or trait may be on chromosome number 10. And so the only way you figure out where these genes are and where these traits are is if you can study the entire genetic code of a leopard gecko and see where these changes are being made. And that is something that Dr. G can do, is doing, and probably will continue to do. So Steve Sykes and Dr. G are one of the avenues in which we might be able to actually decode leopard gecko genetics, the blizzard gene, the albino gene, the white and yellow gene, the giant gene, the albino gene, black knight, tangerine, all of those things, to get a deeper understanding of how these genetic traits are working together to accomplish the causes that we are looking at for breeding. The next way we might be able to accomplish this is through a new genetic company called RGI, which stands for Rare Genetics Inc. These guys are primarily known right now for working with ball pythons, and then they're going into boas and corn snakes and hognoses, and maybe eventually they will get to leopard geckos to the point where they can break down the genome and genetic code of leopard geckos and be able to pinpoint, identify for you where these different genes are located and determine and help figure out for us, is giant and supergiant actually an incomplete dominant gene? a recessive gene or a line bred gene. And until that moment, until we can actually have some scientific lab looking into these things for us, there's no way for us to know 100% with the giant gene specifically what is going on, just because it's so confusing how it works. As you can see, there are people that are in each of these 3 different camps. I would say most people think it's line bred. Ron Tremper thinks it's recessive. Haha, just joking. I love Ron. But there are other people that think it's recessive, obviously. If Gecko Boa is saying that, that carries a lot of weight, because Gecko Boa is like the #1 most respected leopard gecko breeder out there. So if he's saying that, that means a lot. But he did say it was just his opinion. And then there are the traditional crowd, the traditional 3 amigos over here that are just holding on to tradition and being like, yo, it's incomplete dominant, and we're riding that out till the end. So what did you guys think about this video? Did I explain everything well to you of why this is such a controversial genetic trait? I hope so, because I get questions all the time about giant and supergiant, and I've had it on my list for so long to do a video explaining in detail why is there controversy over giant and supergiant and what the hobby thinks about it, and do we have hope for figuring it out 100% in the future? Maybe Dr. G will figure it out, maybe RGI will figure it out, or maybe another company will figure it out. I know there's other companies out there that are working on decoding the genetics of reptiles, and so maybe somebody else will beat them to the punch, since Rare Genetics Inc. is focused and so busy with snakes and ball pythons right now. Maybe someone else needs to step up, because there are labs out there that are more than capable of doing this testing, and so maybe somebody will be able to step into those shoes, and we will see that announced sometime soon in the next 5 years or so for leopard geckos. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Leave a comment below if there's another topic that you want me to cover. I have a lot of topics that I'm going to make videos on, but if you want to make sure that your topic gets covered, leave it in a comment below, and if that's not on my to-do list, I'll put it on my to-do list, at least for consideration. Also, like I said, I'm guaranteeing you guys to start releasing 1 new video every week, so this video will be released on the 13th of October, which is a Monday, and then I will have a new video the week after that, the week after that, the week after that. So we're gonna do 1 polished and edited new video for you guys every single week, no matter what. And there are so many topics I can cover and also recover from my past that I can simplify and maybe make easier for people if things were confusing from some of my prior videos, or just narrow down those topics a little bit more so that you don't have to sit through a 40-minute video on leopard gecko breeding or genetics, but rather I could break those down into 5, 10, or 15-minute videos on specific topics regarding breeding, morphs, health, husbandry, all those kinds of things. So I hope you guys have a blessed day, a blessed week, kicking it off strong on Monday with leopard gecko content, and I'll see you guys very soon. Until next time, my friends, stay safe, pursue your reptile passion, and have a geeky gecko great day. Peace.